All right, what's up, everybody? I know it has been quite a while since I've uploaded a video. I aim to be better at this, but alas, it kind of falls through the cracks sometimes. But today, I really wanted to show you how to do a conditional statement in R using the if-else statement. So as I was thinking through this example for if-else, I stumbled across a great data set from Kaggle, and I'll load this in here, and we can take a look at what this data set shows us. And it gives us a bunch of information about online transactions. So we have invoice numbers. We can see there's multiple values of the same invoice number. So what we're looking at here is a full list of the individual items purchased from some online retailer at some point, the number that they purchased of that particular item in the order, the invoice date, and then a customer ID. So as I was looking through this data set and how to utilize if-else statements, I came across looking at something like an individual customer's refund percentage, as that might be valuable to your business or the project that you're working on. So with this in mind, we can take a look back at the data set that I read in. So it's this online retail CSV data set from Kaggle. I'll link to that data set in the description below this video. And then the only thing I do here is the way the column names are listed in the data set is kind of camel case. So you have capital letters to separate words. I don't like that. I like snake case better. And this janitor, the clean names function from the janitor package will help clean up the names so that they're in that snake case. And then finally, because we are looking at something particularly related to the customer ID, I'm just going to filter out any NAs. There's other ways to deal with working with NAs, but for our purposes of demonstrating this, we're just going to remove them completely from our data set and act like those transactions never occurred. Okay, so now that we've got our data set read in, again, what we want to look at is the refund percentage of individual customers, and then ultimately figure out if that refund, like where the breakdown is for that refund percentage. Do we have a lot of customers that have a high refund percentage, or a lot of customers not refunding anything and our business seems to be solid? So in order to figure that out, we need to look at some of the variables. So if we take a look again at just the head of this sales data set, we see that we have a variable here called quantity. So if we just take a look at the quantity variable, what we have in this quantity variable is a list of all the quantities, right? So we see a bunch of positive quantities, which makes sense, but then we also have a lot of negative quantities here. And so I'm going to assume for the purposes of this video that a negative quantity means that it was a refund. So this is the first place where we're going to actually utilize the if-else statement in this video. So we're going to create a new variable called order type. In order type, we want to break down based on a condition of if quantity is less than 0. And as you can see from this tooltip that pops up here, the if-else statement is actually a really straightforward function to use in R. You have some test or some condition that you want to test. And then the next argument you have is if that condition returns a value of true or yes, then what do you want to do? And then if that condition returns a value of false or no, then what do you want to do? So in our case, if the quantity is less than 0, we want to consider that to be a refund. So we're going to put the order type as refund. And if quantity is not less than 0, i.e. if quantity is greater than or equal to 0, we want to say that the order type of this transaction was a purchase. So now we can see a lot better, we can see a breakdown of this a lot easier and see that a wild majority of our transactions were purchases as opposed to refunds, which is great and also what we would expect. So in order to get an idea of how many transactions an individual customer has done that have led to refunds, or in other words, how many refund transactions an individual customer has, we're going to need to do a little bit of work. So I'm going to create a new data set, call it refunds, and we're going to work off of our sales data set. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to group by the customer ID and the invoice date. Okay. So the invoice date is also unique with the invoice number. So we could also use the invoice number here. I'm just going to use the invoice date instead because we do have a timestamp on it. So every individual transaction will have a different timestamp on it. So what this is going to do is this is going to give us the number of unique purchases. So for each person and each individual invoice date, what we want to do is we want to define what that purchase was, or what that transaction was. Was that transaction a refund transaction, or was that transaction a purchase transaction? And we can get to this pretty easily by just counting the order type. So let's take a look at our refunds data set. So now we've got this customer ID at this date and time, and they had a purchase. At this customer ID at this date and time, same person, 16 minutes later, then refunded what we can only assume is that same order. So they bought something at 10 a.m. They decided a handful of minutes later, nope, never mind, I actually don't want that, and issued a refund for that order. So now that we have this again kind of is really, so we're looking at the individual transactions, right? So this is a purchase transaction, this is a refund transaction. And what we want to do right now is we want to count the number of unique refund transactions that a customer had. So the first thing that we can do is we can actually just get rid of the purchase value of order type. So we're going to filter to order type equal to refund. So now if we take another look at our data set, we won't see any purchases in here because we don't care about those. We're not counting those uniquely right now. So with only the refunds in there, what we want to do is we want to group by the customer ID. So again, we're now just grouping by the person. So we don't care about the individual transactions. We already have this broken down into the number of individual transactions by person. But now we want to specifically group by the person. And then we want to just count the order type again. And so all we're doing when we count this order type again is we're seeing this person with an order type of refund had one transaction that was a refund. This person had 3 transactions that were a refund. So all we're doing here is we're counting the number of transactions that an individual customer ID had that was a refund transaction. So now we can actually just get rid of our order type variable. So now all we have is the customer, and then we have the number of transactions. This end variable, though, doesn't really tell us a whole lot, right? So if we have this, and then we want to come back to our data set, or in this case, we're going to join our data set back to our sales data, this n isn't very informative. So we're going to rename that real quick. So we just go to rename, and the rename function works with what name do you want to name it? And I want to name it total refunds. And then what is the old name that you want to replace it with? What do you that you want to replace? And that was just n. So now if we take a look at our refunds data set, we have a breakdown of all of our individual customer IDs, and we have the number of total refunds. So what we can see here is that there's 1,589 individual customers that have at some point issued a refund and have a refund transaction in their history. Okay, so now that we have this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to join this into our sales data set just so that we can kind of get an accounting of everything. This is largely an irrelevant process for what we're doing, but I do want to give you the full picture of how this is looking inside of all the data that we're using. So as we go through, we can take a look at our sales refund data set, and it's going to be our refunds data set, or sorry, our sales data set. And all we're doing is we're adding in the number of total refunds that we just calculated. So this number for each customer ID will be the same every single time inside of this sales refund data set because we're just joining on the customer ID. So that's all we did here. We took our sales data set and our refund data set, and we said, hey, let's make these into one data set and use the customer ID variable as our key. So let's take a quick look at our sales refunds, and then let's look at our total refunds, right? So we see that there's a handful of these. The biggest thing that I'm concerned about is if there's any missing values, because as we saw, there was only like 1,800 or so people that issued a refund. So I would imagine there's a lot of people that haven't issued a refund. And so false, that means that it is not missing, which is great. But then we also have some trues. So I'm going to deal with these missing values. And if they're missing, that just means that they never had a refund, because remember here, we filtered to only the unique refund transactions. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace, so total refunds. And again, we're going to use this if else statement. And this time we want to check the condition of missing for total refunds. So we use that is.na just like we used here, and it's going to give us one of these two values, either true or false. And again, within this, we do our true condition first, which, so if it is missing, we want to just say they had 0 refunds. And otherwise, it's going to be our false condition, which means that it's not missing. We're just going to keep whatever that value was initially, which would be the total number. Oh, I messed up. I hit shift as well. Okay, so we're good there. So sales refunds, if we take a look at this, we now see, if we filter this, we see now that we have a bunch of zeros in there, which is perfect. So now every single order and every single item within those orders has a total refund value, or a number of total refunds that they have. So now what we want to do is we want to kind of repeat a little bit of what it is that we did above in order to get the number of total unique transactions. So I'm going to call this a really long name, unique transactions, and we're going to go back into working with our sales data set. So here, we're going to go distinct on the customer ID and the invoice date. Just like we grouped by above to get the unique purchases, we're just going to use distinct here for the unique purchases, doing it in a slightly different way than what we had before. And so now, again, we're going to group by the customer ID because, again, all we want to do is we want to count the number of unique purchases somebody has. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a list, order count, sequence of 1 to n. Now, this might be a little bit confusing. So if we look at unique transactions, what we have here is we have the individual invoice date and the individual customer. So we can see this person had a purchase at 8/26, and that's the first purchase that they ever had with us. The same person again had another purchase at 8/28, and that's the second purchase that they had with us. So that's all we're doing here. We're getting the distinct count. And let me actually just show you this really quick. So you can see unique transactions. So here we just have a list of all of the unique transactions. And then when we group by the customer ID here, this next thing that we do, we're grouping by this customer ID because we actually don't care about the individual invoice date now that we've already created a data set of only unique transactions. And then we're going to use this mutate order count to basically just count through all of the rows that we have for that person and assign it a number. So now that we have that number assigned, we want to get the total number of transactions. The end of that list of the number of transactions that they had is going to be the most transactions that they had, for the total number of transactions, I should say. So we can create a variable called total orders, and we're just going to take the max of that order count variable. And so if we look at unique transactions again, we can see here that this person had 2 total transactions, this person had 7 transactions, so on and so forth. So now we have 2 separate data sets, right? We have our refunds data set, which has the total number of refund transactions a person has levied. And then we have our unique transactions data set, which is the total number of unique transactions. So this would be the number of purchase transactions plus the number of refund transactions that we have. So what we'll do is we will add this back into our sales data set and create a sales transactions data set. And this will left join our sales refunds data set, which again is just our sales data set with the total refunds column added, and then our unique transactions data set. And we want to again just join that by the customer ID. So our sales transactions data set is going to have, there was 1 total refund across 34 individual total orders for this person. And again, we see here there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 items that were ordered in their first transaction, but this is only 1 transaction. All 9 of these items have the same customer ID, the same invoice date, except for these 2. So these are 1 transaction, and then these would be another 1. And there's 32 other transactions just like that for this person inside of our data set. So now that we have this info, what we can do is we can also create another variable, and I'm going to actually do that here. Let me just do this. Sales transactions, and we'll just use our sales transactions data set, and we'll create a new variable, and we'll call this total purchases. And what this will be is our total orders minus our total refunds, and this will be the number of orders that were purchase transaction, number of transactions that were purchase transactions as opposed to total transactions or refund transactions. Okay, so now we've got our data set all squared away. We now have for each individual customer ID, how many total orders did they have? And of those total orders, how many of them were refunds and how many of them were purchases? So what we can do with this information now is we can go through and we can define if somebody is a high refund risk, a moderate refund risk, a low refund risk, or a no refund ever non-risk. So I'm going to call this data set refunders, and we're going to take the sales transactions data set. And what we're going to do is we're going to, again, just make sure that we're only looking at 1 customer ID, and we're going to keep all of the columns. So let's look at this. View refunders. Whoops, that's not refunders. Get out of this. So now all we're going to have is we're going to have just this 1 transaction for this 1 person. We don't actually care about any of this information to the left. All we care about is the individual customer ID, the total refunds, the total orders, and the total purchases. Okay. So now that we have this information, what we're going to do is we're going to group by customer ID. And the only reason we're going to group by customer ID is because we're going to use the summarize function, which removes all the variables except the ones that you define inside of your summarize. And it's just another way to do it. We could also use the transmute function here and it would do the same thing. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable and we're going to call it refund percentage. And so this refund percentage is going to be total, what should it be? Total refunds divided by total purchases. Let's do this. Let's just do total orders. We'll keep it at total orders. So now if we look at refunders, we're going to have an individual customer ID and we're going to have their individual refund percentage. So now that we have this, we can use a more complicated if-else statement to define their refunder status. So we mutate and we get refunder status, and this will be equal to if-else. We're going to look at this refund percentage, and if that refund percentage is greater than 25%, we're going to say that they're a high refund risk. Now, previously, we would say, low refund risk if the refund percentage wasn't greater than 25%. But what we're actually going to do here, if the refund percentage is not greater than 25%, we're going to actually do another if-else statement. So our no condition is to then look at another if-else statement, which would be refund percentage greater than 10%, 0.1. Then we're going to say they're a moderate refund risk. And then again, if their refund percentage is greater than 0.05%, so 5% refund percentage, let's assume that's pretty low, so we're going to call this a low refund percentage. Now, if all of these conditions are not met, the only thing, let's actually define this as 0. If this refund percentage is greater than 0, so between 0 and 10%, we're going to say they're low. Now, if their refund percentage doesn't meet any of these qualifications, which really comes down to refund percentage being greater than 0, so if the refund percentage is 0 or less than 0, we're going to say they're no refund risk, right? So now that's how we can have these many nested if-else statements and have them work. So we run that code, we now have the refunders. So if I look at refunders, we can see that this person has a high refunder status, this person has a no refund risk. And so we get this breakdown here. And then one last thing I want to do, and I know this video is quite long, so if you've stuck around with me, really appreciate it. I hope that this is really valuable to you. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a refunder breakdown. Now, what I could do instead is I could look at table, refund, refunders, and then look at the refunder status. And this will give us a breakdown, so 826 people are a high refund risk, 118 are low, 2,700 are no refund risk. But I also want to have the percentages there, and we can just do that really easily by looking into our refunders data set, grouping by the refunder status, counting what we have, and let's just show you what that looks like. View refunder breakdown. So here we have now the total number, and then all we want to do is we just want to ungroup this data set because we don't want this to be grouped by the refunder status anymore, because we want to create a percentage, customer percentage, I guess we'll call this, and we're going to take that end column from our count that we just did of the refunder status, which is just these values in this table here, and we're going to divide that by the sum of that. And what this is going to do is this will give us our refunder breakdown. So with all of this work being done, we've been able to use if-else statements to integrate everything, define unique transactions, define if that unique transaction was a refund transaction or a purchase transaction, get the totals of each of those, and then create a percentage for the number of total transactions a customer has that is a refund transaction, and then assign them a risk of high, low, moderate, or no risk. And so what we can see here is if we actually just look at this, we see that low refund status is the lowest percentage of our customer base, moderate is next, then high, then no refund risk. So one thing that this really shows you is 20% of people are defined as a high refund risk, which is a refund rate being more than 25% of their transactions, being about 25% of their transactions, between 25% and 10% of all of their transactions that they've had with us. So I hope you've stuck around to watch this. I hope you've learned a little bit about how to use if-else statements, and also maybe just a little bit about how to answer a question if you have a question and work through it in a couple of different ways. Are there more efficient ways to do some of the stuff that I've done? Absolutely. But I really want to just show you the process of how you can work through this stuff and how you can utilize some of the knowledge that you're gaining as you're learning R to just answer some really basic questions that may not have a specific purpose, but can help you kind of fine tune your skills. And maybe you come across a question just like this for yourself or for somebody that you're working with. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to try to be a lot better about creating videos that are useful to you and released at a more frequent date. So I hope you guys stick around. Till next time.